The sun hung heavy over the frontier town, a burning coin in the wide blue sky. Its light beat down on warped planks of the boardwalks and sent waves of heat rippling along the dusty main street. Wagons rattled in the distance, dogs barked, and the swinging doors of the saloon banged open and shut as men wandered in and out, carrying their laughter with them. Down that same street came a figure so small and fragile she might have been a shadow stretched thin by the sun. A girl, no more than 10 or 11, walked barefoot over the scorching dust, her thin frame wrapped in a dress torn ragged at the hem. Her tangled dark hair stuck to her cheeks, and in her arms she clutched a cloth bundle, the only thing left of her family. The bundle held little of worth, an old scarf, a keepsake, but to her it was treasure. She pressed it close, her wide dark eyes scanning the faces around her, hoping against hope for a kind word, for a crumb of mercy. But this town had long since forgotten mercy. The first jeer came from a pair of men lounging outside the saloon. One spat into the dirt and smirked. "Look at that scarecrow," he drawled, elbowing his friend. "Rags and bones. Ain't worth a dime." Laughter followed, sharp and cruel. Another voice rang out, "She's nothing but a beggar." A scrap of bread was tossed at her feet, landing in the dust. The girl's stomach ached, but she did not bend to pick it up. Pride still flickered faint within her, though it cost her dearly. She hugged the bundle tighter, her shoulders trembling, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. More townsfolk gathered. Women turned away, men chuckled, even children pointed and laughed. The crowd swelled like a storm around her, their voices mocking, each word another lash against her fragile spirit. Then the sheriff arrived, broad-shouldered, polished boots striking heavy against the boards. His badge gleamed in the sun. Sheriff Cade tipped back his hat, surveyed the scene, and instead of stopping it, let a smirk tug at his lips. "Well now," he said loud enough for all to hear, "looks like a stray wandered in where she don't belong." The girl froze, the laughter of the crowd pressing on her from every side. She hugged her bundle tighter, fighting back sobs. But the sheriff's eyes glinted with cruel amusement, and the crowd roared louder than ever. The sheriff's boots clicked against the wooden planks as he stepped closer, his shadow falling long across the dusty street. The crowd quieted a little, curiosity sharpening into something darker. Every man, woman, and child leaned in to see what Sheriff Cade would do. The little girl stood frozen, her thin shoulders quaking beneath the weight of so many eyes. Her small hands clutched the bundle to her chest as though it could shield her. But the sheriff was a man who carried power like a whip, and he enjoyed nothing more than showing it. "Well," Cade drawled, his voice slow and cruel, "ain't you a pitiful sight? Dirty, ragged, begging your way through my town. We don't keep strays here." His words carried an edge sharper than steel, and the crowd chuckled nervously, following his lead. He tugged his coat back, revealing the polished revolver on his hip, its silver catching the sun. The girl's eyes widened, her breath hitched, but she did not move. "Go on, Sheriff," a man shouted from the crowd. "Run her out of town." Another voice sneered, "Teach her a lesson. That's what happens to gutter trash." The girl's chest heaved as tears welled in her eyes, but she pressed her lips tight. Her mother had once told her never to beg, even when the world was cruel. And so she stood, trembling yet silent, her gaze darting between the sheriff and the dust at her feet. Sheriff Cade let his hand rest deliberately on the grip of his revolver, and his smirk deepened. "Maybe the only lesson she'll understand," he said, his voice carrying across the square, "is the kind taught with cold iron." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Some grinned at the prospect of a spectacle. Others shifted uneasily, but none stepped forward. Not one soul raised a hand for the orphan girl. The sheriff drew the revolver in one smooth motion, the metallic click as it cleared the holster ringing louder than the beating of the girl's heart. She staggered back a step, clutching her bundle tighter, tears spilling down her dirt-streaked cheeks. The square fell silent. The crowd held its breath. Dust swirled lazily in the air as if time itself paused to see what would happen next. A little girl, alone. A sheriff with his gun raised, and a town unwilling to stop him. From the far end of the street came the low, steady sound of hoofbeats, slow at first, then sharper, cutting through the heavy silence like thunder rolling in. Heads turned and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Out of the shimmering heat a rider emerged, A tall figure in a wide-brimmed hat, dust from the trail clinging to his coat. His horse, a chestnut stallion with a white blaze down its nose, moved with calm certainty, each step deliberate as though it knew its rider carried purpose. The cowboy sat tall in the saddle, his eyes shaded beneath the brim of his hat, but there was no mistaking the weight of his presence. Where the sheriff's authority came from a badge and a gun, this man's came from the raw respect carved into him by miles of hard trail and battles weathered in silence. The sheriff, revolver in hand, turned his head, annoyed at the distraction. "You've no business here, stranger," Cade barked, though a flicker of unease edged his words. The cowboy reined in his horse a few feet from the girl, whose tear-streaked face tilted up toward him. His gaze swept over her, ragged clothes, bare feet, trembling hands clutching the bundle. Something in his jaw tightened. He dismounted slowly, boots sinking into the dust. Each movement was calm, deliberate. He did not glance at the sheriff nor the crowd, but walked straight to the girl. His coat flared slightly as he crouched before her, his voice low enough only she could hear. "You're safe now," he said gently, his tone carrying a quiet strength. "No one's gonna hurt you while I'm here." Her lips parted, a shaky breath escaping as her wide eyes filled with both fear and hope. She clutched the bundle tighter but did not step back. The sheriff snorted. "Big words for a drifter. Best move along before you catch yourself some trouble." He raised the revolver higher, the metal glinting in the sunlight, but the cowboy finally looked up then, his gaze locking with the sheriff's. His eyes, steady and unflinching, held no fear, only a warning. The kind of warning that came from a man who had stood against worse and walked away. The crowd shifted, sensing the air grow heavier. A new tension wound through the square, sharp as a drawn blade. The orphan girl stood between them, and for the first time someone had chosen her side. The sheriff's revolver remained steady, but the crowd's murmurs swelled with unease. Never before had someone stood so calmly in Cade's shadow, and never for a ragged child the town had already condemned. The cowboy knelt lower, his spurs barely clinking in the dust. He unfastened the buttons of his trail-worn coat, the heavy canvas lined with wool, and without hesitation, draped it across the girl's thin shoulders. The coat seemed to swallow her, its weight far greater than her frail frame, yet she held it close with trembling hands. To her, it wasn't just warmth. It was a shield, a sign that someone had seen her suffering and chosen to act. Tears glimmered in her eyes, not of fear this time, but of fragile relief. The crowd hushed. Men who had jeered moments before now shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet the girl's gaze beneath the cowboy's coat. A woman pressed her lips together, ashamed. Even the children stopped laughing, sensing something sacred in the act. The sheriff scoffed, though his smirk faltered. "A coat don't change the truth. She's still nothing but a stray. And you—" He jabbed the revolver toward the cowboy. "You're meddling in law business." The cowboy rose to his full height, dust clinging to his boots, his shadow stretching long beside the girl. His voice was calm, steady, but it carried through the square like the crack of a whip. "Law?" he said. "Law's meant to protect the helpless, not to break 'em." His words cut deeper than any bullet, and for the first time some of the townsfolk nodded faintly, shame creeping across their faces. The sheriff's jaw tightened, his grip on the revolver firm, but doubt flickered in his eyes. The girl clutched the coat tighter, burying her face in its folds. For the first time in days, perhaps in her whole life, she felt the weight of another's strength holding back the world. The cowboy reached down, offering her his hand. It was scarred and calloused, but steady as stone. After a hesitant moment, the girl slipped her small hand into his, her fingers curling tight around his own. The crowd stood frozen, watching. A single gesture had shifted the ground beneath their feet. The sheriff still held his gun, but everyone knew. The balance of power had begun to change. The street lay heavy with silence, broken only by the low whicker of the cowboy's horse. Dust swirled in the air as though even the wind held its breath. Sheriff Cade still had his revolver raised, but his authority, once unshakable, felt thinner with each passing second. The crowd no longer laughed. No one jeered. Their eyes followed only the man in the wide-brimmed hat and the girl cloaked in his coat. The cowboy's gaze never left the sheriff's. His voice was calm, almost quiet, but it carried to every ear in the square. This ends here, Cade's jaw clenched. He wanted to bark back, to assert his power, but the steady fire in the cowboy's eyes pinned him. For the first time in years, Cade's authority cracked, not with a gunfight, but with silence. The cowboy turned, placing himself squarely between the sheriff and the child. Without breaking stride, he led her toward his horse. His hand rested lightly on her back, steadying her as her bare feet stumbled through the dust. Each step seemed to echo louder than the sheriff's threats ever had. "Stop right there," Cade barked, but his words rang hollow. His revolver trembled just enough for the crowd to see, and with that tremor, his dominance wavered. The cowboy didn't stop. He lifted the girl gently, settling her onto the saddle as though she weighed no more than a feather. She clutched the saddle horn, her small fingers pale against the worn leather, while his coat hung loose around her shoulders. He swung up beside her in one smooth motion, reins in hand. The horse shifted, muscles coiled, ready to move. For a moment, the square froze in perfect stillness. Sheriff, crowd, cowboy, child, all bound in the same breathless pause. Then the cowboy nudged his heels into the horse's side. The stallion surged forward, hooves thundering against the earth, a cloud of dust rising in their wake. The crowd parted instinctively, men stumbling back, women clutching their skirts, children craning to see. The sheriff lowered his revolver at last, his face pale with rage and something he would never admit aloud: fear. No one dared follow. No one dared stop them. The cowboy and the orphan girl rode into the open horizon, leaving behind the echoes of cruelty and a town that would never forget the day silence defeated a gun. The prairie stretched wide beneath the rising sun, its golden light washing the world in warmth the girl had nearly forgotten existed. Birds stirred in the tall grass, and the steady rhythm of the cowboy's horse carried them farther and farther from the town that had mocked her, threatened her, and left her alone. For the first time in days, she let herself breathe without fear. The heavy coat draped across her shoulders smelled faintly of leather, smoke, and dust, strange scents that somehow felt like safety. She pressed it close, her small frame sinking into its folds, as though it could hold her together after so many cruel days. The cowboy rode beside her, silent but steady. He didn't press her with questions, didn't demand thanks. His presence alone was enough, solid as the horizon, unshaken as the trail stretching before them. Every so often, he glanced at her to be sure she remained upright in the saddle. Each glance held something unspoken, a quiet promise that she would not be abandoned again. They stopped by a creek at midday. The cowboy helped her down, his hand steadying her as her bare feet touched the cool grass. She knelt at the water's edge, her reflection wavering, a face streaked with dust and tears. But behind her own reflection stood the cowboy, tall and unyielding, and for the first time she saw herself not as alone, but protected. He shared bread and dried meat from his saddlebag. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, her hunger easing though her heart remained full of questions. Why had he helped her when no one else had? When she finally asked, her voice was barely a whisper. Why? The cowboy looked out across the open land, his jaw set against the sun. After a long moment, he answered, simple and steady, because no child should face the world alone. Her throat tightened, and tears welled in her eyes again. But they were different this time, not born of fear or shame, but of relief. For the first time in her young life, she felt the faint stirrings of hope. The trail stretched endlessly before them, but it no longer seemed impossible. With each step of the horse, each beat of her heart, the girl realized something the town had never allowed her to believe. Tomorrow could hold more than pain. Tomorrow could be hers.